Elizabeth, maybe. Today we're doing Unit 5. Today we're talking about slavery first. So again, not everything on this test, or not everything in this lecture is going to be on the test, or rather not everything in this unit will be on the test. So we'll try to get through all the key content as quickly as we can. That way you guys can get home as early as possible. You should be familiar with this notion of the peculiar institution and why slavery was considered peculiar. And it's because while everyone else was getting rid of slavery, America was still expanding slavery. So you should be familiar with that idea. And the basic idea that it's weird to have slavery in a country that prides itself of being a country of democracy. So that weird dichotomy is a bit strange for our country. So the reasons for peculiarity are important. History of slavery is pretty critical, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. You should be familiar with the impact, though, of Bacon's Rebellion on slavery, right? The basic notion of because of Bacon's Rebellion, we ended up trading indentured servants for slaves. So that's pretty good. Don't worry about slavery in the Constitution or anything like that. You should, again, know the significance of the cotton plantations and being influenced by the cotton gin. So be, again, aware of the significance of the cotton gin and the rise of plantations. Further, you should be aware of the notion of cotton is king. The basic idea is that by this time, the southern states were using cotton as their cash crop and growing primarily the southern cash crop. And as a result, cotton was king. The significance here, though, is that because they're growing only cotton, what did they not do? Yeah, they didn't grow other crops, and they did not do what other economic thing. They didn't industrialize. So you need to be aware of the fact that because of the decision to just grow the single cotton cash crop, they did not industrialize, and they did not grow other crops. So bad move for them, ultimately. And that's really going to hurt them in the long term. Nonetheless, as a result, you start seeing this expansion of slavery throughout the South, and it grows pretty dramatically as a result. And here, as you can see, slavery has expanded by this time. Most of the slaves in the South, again, were growing cotton in what we describe as the Cotton Belt, as you guys can see. And again, you can see the slave population rising over time. This you should know, the Southern Slave Society. So you need to know one of the first things. Number one is that there was a class system between the upper class, some slaves, no slave owners, free blacks, and then slaves. Did most people own slaves or not own slaves? No. Most people did not own slaves. In fact, what percentage of people did not own slaves in the South? 75%. So an overwhelming majority of people actually did not own slaves. So the question is, if most people did not own slaves in the South, why did those non-slave owners continue to support slavery? Why would you support slavery if you did not own slaves? For what reason would that be? Well, really what it comes down to is that American dream. I might one day have slaves, and that was great. One of the other major reasons why you do support slavery is because of this idea that you might be, you're fearing competition, right? You don't want to free the slaves because that's job competition right there. Another major reason why these people supported slavery, just sheer racism. They're just racist. They think that black people are less than whites. So you have that going on as well. So regardless of any of your reasons, one of the major reasons why these poor lower class people supported slavery, they were just racist and they wanted slaves themselves. So you need to be aware of the reasons and the Southern society. As previously explained, again, you should be aware of the percentage of actual slave owners in the South. And if I asked you who owned more, which group is larger, those who own no slaves, those who own one slave, or those who own 20, obviously it's the group that owned no slaves at all. So just be aware, most people, again, did not own slaves in the South. You don't really have to be aware of the distinction between cotton plantations versus small plantation farming. Regardless, though, no matter where you worked, life was not good, right? If you lived on a large farm, you're more likely to get beaten. You live on a small farm, you're less likely to get beaten, but you're more likely to be lonely. Now, why might you be more likely to get beaten on a large farm?
Because there's more slaves and they're not afraid of
Yeah, I mean, you die, and then I'll just replace you with someone else. I mean, no big deal. And that's why also there's that strange, interesting dichotomy where all the hard work is done by black slaves. All the dangerous work is done by who? The Irish. Because if an Irishman falls off your roof, that's $1 a day, no big deal. When a slave falls off your roof, that's $1,700. So again, you have that, that change in a type of work. You don't really have to go into the details of how difficult or how tenuous slave life was, the negative conditions, or even slave rebellions. And even then, slave codes, I think you'll be okay with, but you should just know the basic slave codes. You can't go out at night, not allowed to have a weapon, you can't congregate, you have to go to church but have a white minister, or at least have a white man in the church, all the basic things. You can't educate them to speak, you can't educate them in writing or reading, so some basic stuff. Here are just some basic examples of slave codes that you guys don't have to know. Fugitive slave law. Definite must know. So the Fugitive Slave Law was originally passed in 1793, again, asking that if a slave did run away, what were you legally required to do by the federal government? You had to return the slave. Now, did most people return slaves that ran away? No, they did not. So even though you were legally required to return slaves, most Northerners kind of scoffed at the law, saying, I'm not going to do that, because my moral compass tells me not to. And so many people did not actually return slaves despite being required to do so. This is really the beginning of that sectional tensions. You don't want to accept slavery, but you're being required to keep it. I wouldn't really worry too much about slave conditions, but as you guys know, and the different kinds of slave resistance, obviously one of the best ways to resist was simply just to run away. But again, many others sang songs. That sambo image is the notion that they would act lazy. You're familiar with that sambo image as well. Here's all the drinking gourd about the North Star and the Big Dipper. You don't have to know any of the rebellions, surprisingly, for this test, so I wouldn't worry about any, except for Nat Turner's rebellion, if nothing more than just knowing that this is a slave rebellion and not, Bacon's rebellion or Shays' rebellion or Liza's rebellion. So if you know that Nat Turner's rebellion is a slave rebellion, you should be okay. Don't worry about the arguments for or against slavery either. Again, if you had an essay, this would probably likely something you would definitely have to know. But because the majority of this test is just key multiple choice questions, I'm not too worried about this section for now, or the arguments against slavery. This is also not something that you guys need to know about at the moment. The abolition movements are critical, though. You guys do need to be familiar with the abolition movements again, and we talked about this yesterday. But again, just be familiar. Theodore Dwight Weld's American Slavery as It Is argued that the person most hurt by slavery was which group? Yeah, poor white farmers. The argument is that poor white farmers are struggling because they were supposed to have the land, but they can't compete with free labor. So again, American Slavery as It Is argues that the poor white farmer is suffering the most. Not slaves, not blacks. No one cares about those guys. What it comes down to is poor white farmers. They're the ones struggling. So it's a pretty interesting book. You should be familiar with Theodore Dwight Weld's American Slavery as It Is. American Colonization Society, what did they want to do? Come on, folks. They want to send them back to Africa. I think they want to recolonize Africa. They want to send them back to Africa. So when you think American Colonization Society, again, just remember, this is the Back to Africa movement. The American Colonization Society is the Back to Africa movement. Send them back to Africa. That's a must-know on your test. As is the American Anti-Slavery Society. You should also know what they stood for. And in particular, the American Anti-Slavery Society is, again, they want immediate abolition. They want to end slavery right away. They don't want it to be compensated, and it's led by this man, William Lloyd Garrison. So you should be familiar with the American Anti-Slavery Society. Now, as I recall, this is going to be in actually your Unit 4 notes. But again, if you don't have it in your Unit 5 notes, I would go back later and just jot it back in. But again, this is William Lloyd Garrison in charge of the American Anti-Slavery Society. He wrote the newspaper The Liberator, which is also pretty critical. So there's that. Cool. Questions there? Again, Sojourner Truth and Frederick Douglass are not on your test, so don't worry about them today, but they'll likely come up again on your second semester final. So be familiar with these people. Harriet Tubman, also not on your final, despite her being in charge of what? On the Underground Railroad. She's not going to be on your final either, so just be familiar with her. Here's the Underground Railroad going all the way up to Canada. Why do they have to go all the way up to Canada? Why can't they just hang out in New York or Massachusetts? What law is making them not be allowed to stay in these northern states? The Fugitive Slave Law. If it weren't for the Fugitive Slave Law, these people might actually be able to just stay in Boston or Massachusetts or New York. But because of the Fugitive Slave Law, the Underground Railroad has to go all the way up through to Canada. Unfortunate. Don't worry about the Lane Rebels. They won't be on your test, but they're the ones who were discussing what where. Lane Rebels. There's one where they held that multi-day debate about slavery in the church. So there's that. The Impending Crisis of the South. Again, another book that argues that the poor whites were also hurt by slavery the most. There's another book saying that, again, poor whites were hurt the most by slaves. So just argue that as well. Uncle Tom's Cabin, a definite must-know. Here's a book that pretty much convinced everyone that slavery was bad if you were undecided. Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. For those that are opposing abolition, there's a lot of reasons why to oppose abolition. Again, here's my favorite cartoon suggesting that if you're an abolitionist, you're the devil's friend, because slavery is a good thing promoted by God. So, kind of interesting. The gag rule and the post office rule, two things you should be aware of. Were these laws passed by the North or the South? The gag rules. The gag rule and post office rule, were these laws that were promoted by the North or the South? By the South, right? Because the gag rule said you were not allowed to debate slavery in the House or Congress. And the post office rule said you couldn't what? Yeah, you couldn't send abolitionist material through the mails. And so this is one way to, again, stop abolitionists from trying to end slavery. So these are, again, parts of the Southern conspiracy, the belief that the Southerners are trying to take over the country. And this is why a lot of Northerners are really suspicious of the South. I mean, passing laws like this really does infringe upon the rights of the North. I mean, the North has the right to send mailings. Not anymore, according to this. So we talk about sectional struggles with slavery, and we're really going to get into the biggest differences between, again, the different compromises. Of course, you have the Missouri Compromise of 1820. As we all remember, this is the compromise that allowed Missouri to become a slave state if what became a free state? Maine. And they also established what line across the United States? 3630. And also we ruled that above that line, you cannot have what? Slavery. Do you have to have slavery below? No, that was the loophole that they failed to close. So Missouri Compromise, did it help increase tensions or decrease tensions? It reduced tensions over time, right? Because it was actually quite successful for the over 34 years. Good job, Missouri Compromise of 1820. Then we started expanding west. And with the Mexican-American War and the purchase of Oregon, things got pretty complicated because we start adding land to the United States. And the biggest problem is that if we start adding land to the U.S., these states are going to start asking what question? Yeah, slave or free. I mean, am I going to be a free state or am I going to be a slave state? So these are the things that will test the slavery balance. They will test the slavery tensions. 1848 is really where this begins. You should be familiar with the Free Soil Party and the Liberty Party. Remember, they're two different groups. The Free Soil Party believes in what? Anti-expansion of slavery because, again, it's bad for who? It's bad for poor whites. Liberty Party believes in abolition. So know the difference between the Liberty Party and the Free Soil Party. Free Soil Party says you can have slavery there, but don't let it expand. Abolition, or the Liberty Party says no slavery anywhere. We have to abolish it. So big difference. Know the difference. Anywho, you have Zachary Taylor, Millard Fillmore. Don't worry about those guys. And we're good so far. Any questions there? None? Cool. Let's continue the road to the Civil War. Which one's which? I have two of them. Tablet PC's conflicted copy. I don't know what the hell that means. Let's take this one. Question? Okay. Got it. Got that part, that part, that part. Ah, there you go. So again, Free Soil Party and Liberty Party, you guys got that? You good there? Cool. The other issue then is California seeks admission. And why does California want to become a state? The gold rush. Remember all the Heldorados we talked about recently? Well, there's all these Heldorados emerging, and there's all this vigilante justice, a lot of chaos, people are dying. So California says, we want law and order, we want to become a state. Now, here's the issue. California is one of those states that is right in the middle of that 3630 line. And the question that many assumed was that if California is in the middle, right here again, and if most of it is below the line, the expectation was that California was going to become what? A slave state. It's majority below the line. Instead, when California seeks admission, it submits a constitution that actually requests becoming a free state. What is the problem? Who believes that's wrong? So I say, whoa, 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 whoa. It is my understanding that any state below that line must be slave. But is that correct? No, because they miswrote the Missouri Compromise of 1820, saying, no, 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 no. It doesn't have to be slave below the line. Only no slave above the line. So California gets admitted as a free state, but does the South want to secede after this? They're angry. So how do we resolve this dispute? The Compromise of 1850. Compromised by who? Henry Clay, the great compromiser. So Henry Clay comes in and says, check it out, here's what we're going to do. Let California become a free state. It's not like they're that important anyway, even though it turns out that California becomes one of the most powerful states in the country. So we're going to let California become a free state. But we will also allow Utah and New Mexico territory, or the Nevada-New Mexico territory, we will allow them to determine their slave status based on what? Popular sovereignty. In addition, we're going to go ahead and ban slavery from Washington, D.C. because it looks bad when you're trading slaves in your capital. But the most controversial, the most tension-increasing aspect of the Compromise of 1850 was what? The new fugitive slave law, and that, by far, folks, was the worst. Because we felt as if the Southerners were forcing this idea that we had to respect the right to slavery down our throats. Now, the Southerners had a point. We are a United States. In the South, do we have the right to own slaves? Sure we do. And if my slave runs away, should I reasonably expect that my stolen property, stolen by itself apparently, can be returned? Yes. Just like if your horse runs away from the North, I should return it to you. Why should you not return my slave? But the North response was, well, naturally because it's slavery and people, and that's immoral. And I don't appreciate the fact that you're forcing your terrible beliefs on me. So, ultimately, did anyone follow the law? No. But what this does is what? It does force them to return the slaves, but what is the overall significance of the fugitive slave laws? It increased tensions over time. And again, it significantly increases these sectional tensions over time. Too good. Then you have Franklin Pierce, but who cares about Franklin Pierce? And then we talked about these cool expansions to the south. Again, we talked about William Walker trying to expand to the south, and that didn't pan out. Again, because they can't expand north because of the Missouri Compromise of 1820. So William Walker again tries to expand to California. That doesn't pan out. He also tries to expand to Nicaragua. Did that pan out? No, he was killed. Then we tried to expand to Cuba, and we had that secret plan to do it. What was that secret plan called? Yeah, the Ostend Manifesto. So you should know the Ostend Manifesto. Don't worry about the filibusteros. That's not important. We'll come back to talking about Cuba in the next unit, though. We'll talk about how America tried to take Cuba again, but fails, kind of, sort of, but succeeds. It's weird. So there's that. Then there's the Gadsden Purchase. So the Southerners decide, fine, we will give California to the North, But do they still really want California? Of course they do. So their plan is this. We will build a transcontinental railroad, a southern transcontinental railroad in the South. And by doing so, that'll allow the South to eventually control California, right? And by the way, do we build this transcontinental railroad? Yeah, we do the Southern Pacific, right? We eventually do build this anyway, but the Civil War is over by that time. So they want to build that Southern Transcontinental Railroad, so they make the Gadsden Purchase. And the Gadsden Purchase cost us, what, about $10 million or something? 10 mils? Yeah, $10 million. And are the Northerners just going to let the Southern states just build their own railroad to California? Absolutely not. So Stephen Douglas was like, hey, what if we build a railroad in the North? The problem with building a railroad in the North, though, is that it has to pass through what two territories? Kansas and Nebraska. From Illinois, it's going to do this. Because of that, they're saying, well, we can't just build that land through those territories until those territories become what? They have to become states. So they said, let's make Kansas and Nebraska states. Now, here's the problem for many people. Kansas and Nebraska are above that 3630 line. So who's okay with this? No, let's totally make them states. But the South says, no, they are going to become free states. We don't like this plan. Now, does Stephen Douglas really want to build this railroad? She was like, all right, how about this, South? Let's compromise. I will allow us to build the railroads by letting Nebraska and Kansas decide via what? Popular sovereignty. And at this point, who was pissed off? Not the South, the North. Because by declaring or allowing Kansas and Nebraska to have popular sovereignty in the North, what door did that open? Yeah, it now allows slavery to be possible in the North. Because before, Missouri Compromise said no slavery in the North at all. But the Kansas-Nebraska Act voided the Missouri Compromise, and it said you can have slavery if you vote for it. And that was a really bad idea. Does that increase sectional tensions? Almost definitely. And as a result, folks, because of this decision, you see the birth of the Republican Party. People are pissed. The beginning of this Republican Party, just to make clear, though, this Republican Party, are they an abolition party? No. This Republican Party, you should know this, folks, it is not an abolition party. It's an anti-slavery party. It's an anti-expansion party. Okay, the Republican Party is an anti-expansion party. Do they like slaves? Absolutely not. But do they respect the southern states' right to have slaves for the time being? Yeah, they can't do anything about it. So they said, let's just let them have their slaves. We're not going to go to battle for it anytime soon, lest they forget that there's a civil war going to happen in about 6 years. But again, they don't know that. And so it's just one of those things where, again, they want to avoid conflict. They don't want to go to war. They just don't want it to expand. So it's that free soil philosophy that gets absorbed into the Republican Party. Then Bleeding Kansas happens, and blood is spilled on the plains of Kansas. Why is blood being spilled in Kansas? Why is there so much violence in Kansas, guys? Yeah, why is everyone moving there? Why are Northerners and Southerners moving to Kansas? Yeah, slave or free, right? Because the issue is popular sovereignty. And what happens is that, look at all these Southerners living right here in Missouri. Can they easily move to Kansas? Sure they can. So you're going to have these border ruffians moving in and voting slavery. And are the Northerners just willing to give up a northern state? No way, we're going to make that free. So they send their own people over via the New England Emigrant Aid Society or New England Emigrant Aid Company. And we're going to send them bringing what with them? Beecher's Bible, so they can read. No, so they can shoot people. Because Beecher's Bibles, folks, are rifles. All right? So again, it's one of those things where a lot of people are moving in. Are things going to get violent? Yeah, in fact, you're going to have John Brown and the Potawatomi Massacre. Blood will be spilled. People will die. And people will be angry. So you should know the Potawatomi Massacre. Surprisingly, you don't have to know the Sumner Brooks incident. It's not going to be on your test. It's a fun story, though. But a man being beaten in the middle of Congress with someone's cane. And as a result, people start showing up to work with guns and knives. Congress, no less. I like to think that today, because of all like the Democratic-Republican tensions over the fiscal cliff, that someone's going to get beaten up in the Senate, and then they're going to start bringing guns and knives to work. It could happen. You know how tense politics can get. Anywho, are things getting bad? Yeah, people are getting beaten up in Congress, people are dying in Kansas, and yet there is no civil war yet. James Buchanan becomes president, and he's a president that really does nothing. Then you have the Dred Scott case, a definite must-know. And Dred Scott really said a few things. What's one thing that Dred Scott said in the decision, the Dred Scott decision? Yeah, definitely. Slaves are property. That's the first thing. And secondly, what else about slavery? Slaves can't testify in court. And what else about slavery? You cannot deny one's right to slavery. So does that really just overturn everything about what we know about what is legal with slavery? Yeah, up until this point, did the Northerners have the right to deny slavery in their state? Yes, they did. But now can they? No. And so the really decision comes down to, are you or are you not going to enforce this law? And most states said, no, I'm not going to enforce it. I don't care what the Supreme Court says. And the Northerners just went along with that. Nonetheless, folks, the Panic of 1807, this is somewhat important. You should also know the Panic of 1857. Not because it was caused by overspeculation. I mean, yes, that is what caused it. But more importantly, why is the Panic of 1857 significant with regard to the South? Yeah, it was unaffected. It made them feel invincible. If we can survive a Panic of 1857 and the North is crumbling, we can do anything. And so the Panic of 1857 really did test America, and it showed us the North is weak, the South is strong, and does it give us more courage to secede when the time comes? Yeah, like, oh, look, we succeeded back then. What's to say we can't succeed on our own? So the Panic of 1857 was just one of those things that did not pan out for us. It actually made the war more likely. And so Abraham Lincoln's elected. Here he is. Cool guy. He just woke up. And Lincoln-Douglas debates, as you guys know, here's when he debated against Lincoln-Douglas, but don't actually worry about them for your final. You don't have to worry about Lincoln-Douglas debates. Nor do you have to worry about the Freeport Doctrine anytime soon, so you're good there. And you don't have to worry about John Brown or Harper's Ferry either. That's not going to be on your test. But you should know that, again, when he was killed, the South was like, aha, we killed that murderer, but the North did not refer to him as a murderer. They called him what? A hero, a martyr. He's a man that fought for what he believed in. You know who else says that? People who support Osama bin Laden. Like, Osama bin Laden's a murderer. But there are those like, man, that he was trying to kill those heathen Americans who killed all the children in the Middle East. And so, look, it depends on which side of the story you want to look at. Election of 1860. Here's where Lincoln runs. And Lincoln, he wins. But he wins despite what? What were the oddities of this election? The election of 1860. Yeah, no one in the South voted. Literally, no one in the South voted for him. And did he still win? What did that suggest about the political power of the South? Yeah, the North controlled the government. I mean, if you can win with no Southern states voting for you, do you really matter? Absolutely not. Why even bother being part of this country? And I really like teaching this class in the sense that when you start going back over the maps again, you start saying, oh, wait, Nevada wasn't a state yet. Oh, Utah wasn't a state yet. Because we just looked at an 1896 map where pretty much every state was already a state. And you go back and you wonder, oh, Kansas is not there yet. Neither is Oklahoma, or neither is Nevada. So it's always cool for me to see this. But Lincoln is elected, and here he is, a young Abraham Lincoln. And he served for 5 years. Interesting. What happened to him? He was assassinated. Confederate States decide to secede. Again, you don't really have to know very much about the secession of the Confederate States. Once this begins, there's really going to be very few questions on any of this stuff. Don't worry about Jefferson Davis going to war or any of that. Don't worry about the Crittenden Compromise either, even though that was a failure. Don't worry about the questions of secession or the differences between the North and the South. Again, a lot of this stuff is, again, filler in the event that you have to write an essay. So it's always one of those things where Did I have to know that? Of course you did. Do you have to know it for your final? Just some guys. Drunk, admiral, cool guy, crazy. Southern advantages, disadvantages, don't worry about that so much. Don't worry about that either. Here he is boxing. This actually happened. It was in the movie, right? Did you see that scene where Lincoln boxed out Davis? Did they have that in the movie? It was a good scene. He probably fell asleep. It was a good scene. Very impressive. Don't worry about Lincoln's inauguration. Really, the only battle you guys need to know is board 6 of Cession. Again, most of the stuff is just you should know about troops. Union soldiers. Majority of them were what? Volunteers. And those that did not volunteer, they were what? Yeah, they were drafted. And that resulted in the New York Draft Riots, right? Because did they want to fight in this war? No, they did not. In fact, who in particular did not want to fight in this war? The blacks. No, they want to fight. But they're fighting for themselves. Which ones? Which group did not want to fight in this war? No, not the poor farmers either. Well, the rich, no, but they're going to hire bounty brokers and substitutes. Huh? The Irish. So good guesses, but no, it's the Irish. The Irish is the group that is unwilling to fight. Because primarily, why don't the Irish want to free the blacks? They'll take away jobs. And so the Irish are coming into America, they're here for jobs, and now they're being told not only can you not work, because you have to go fight in a war, but you're going to put your life on the line, you might die, and when we free these people, they're going to take your jobs. Would you want to fight in that war? No. And so really what it comes down to is that in the North, a lot of people were forced to fight. Again, like you said, the rich didn't want to fight, so they hired substitutes or bounty brokers. But if you were poor and you're Irish, you were going to get drafted. You're going to be forced into the war. You were going to get conscripted.
Do they get paid?
They did get paid. They did get paid. But again, some people say it doesn't matter how much you pay me. I don't want to stand in front of a gun. It's just one of those things. So again, the New York Draft Riots, you should be aware of the riots and who served in the military. There were black soldiers as well. I believe there are no questions about black Union troops. I don't think there are, so I think you'll be okay there. But sometimes when they do ask, the question might be something along the lines of, what did they do? Did they just build canals? No, they fought, right? They actually fought in the war, so that's something you guys should be familiar with. In fact, look at all the battles they fought in. Impressive. Like we said, most people were volunteers, but a good amount were draftees and substitutes that were not too pleased or happy. Confederate soldiers, were most of them volunteers? Yeah, most of them were also volunteers. But again, did we have to draft a good amount of them as well? Okay, we had to draft a good amount of those as well. So, cool beans. Civil War women fought in this war. Spies, soldiers, nurses, whatever else. So, don't worry about that too much. Don't worry about that. In terms of key battles of the war, don't worry about any of them. You should know the Anaconda Plan. You guys remember the Anaconda Plan? Wrap around, blockade, take the Mississippi River, wrap, divide and conquer, done. Pretty cool. You don't worry about the ironclad Monitor and the Merrimack, even though that was pretty cool. You should know the Battle of Antietam. Because of the Battle of Antietam and a Union victory, this resulted in the Union being able to issue what? The Emancipation Proclamation. Now, why couldn't we do it after a loss? Why can't we just free the slaves if we lost? It'd make us desperate. Oh my, we're losing. What should we do? Let's free the slaves. And the South would be like, you see, we got them on the ropes. They're so desperate that they're going to free the blacks. Remember, folks, up to this point, was the war about freeing the slaves? No. Remember, Lincoln was willing to win the war and not free the slaves, right? He was willing to win, bring the South back, and let slavery exist. But because of the Battle of Antietam, and we needed, a kick to the butt for the South or the North to get them to really care about this war, we declared the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, fun thing about the Emancipation Proclamation, it freed all the slaves, right? No, it did not. It did not free all the slaves. Which slaves did it free? Not even that. It only freed the slaves in the South. By the way, do we have any control over the slaves in the South? So, by my calculations, how many slaves did Lincoln free? 0. What it did was that many people started rebelling. Oh my God, Lincoln says we can be free, so they start rebelling. But for the most part, it's not like we had airplanes that could airdrop pamphlets saying, oh, you're free now. So by word of mouth, some slaves started rebelling, but for the most part, no. And so again, you have the always fun phrase, where he could, he would not, and where he would, he could not. He can't free the slaves in the North because the border states will break away. He can't free the slaves in the South because he has no control over the slaves in the South. So he freed slaves nowhere. And yet, he does it because of it's a moral compass. It changes the direction of the war. Does it kind of make us feel better now? Like, oh, not only are we fighting to save the Union, but we're fighting to save an entire race of people. We have to win now. And because he does this, who's willing to fight? Black people are willing to fight in the war. But again, very famous quote, if I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could do it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. That was in the movie, right? This one? Must have been. Oh my God, Julia. How about next? I'll watch the movie and then you ask after. So again, well, that happens. Be familiar with the border states again. Don't worry about Gettysburg. Don't worry about the Gettysburg Address, though it is one of my favorite speeches. And it's short, too, but the Gettysburg Address is pretty awesome. 4 scores and all that jazz. By the way, does anyone know what a score is? We say 4 scores. How many? 20 years. Very good. 20 years. Does anyone know how long a fortnight is? A fortnight? 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 4 scores and 7 years ago, 87 years ago, our founders brought forth on this continent 20 years, so it's 87 years. 4 scores, so 4 times 20 is 80, plus 7. So 4 scores and 7 years ago. Don't worry about the Battle of New Orleans, and again, what's wrong with this picture?
That's the Revolutionary.
Not even the Revolutionary. War of 1812. War of 1812. Yeah, Karina. That was Karina Maldonado, by the way, who got that wrong. For the entire internet to know. Karina Maldonado who got that one wrong. It's actually not the Revolutionary War. This is the War of 1812. Don't worry about Sherman's March to the Sea. I'm pretty sure I took that question out. You should be familiar with Total War, though. Don't worry about Southern Peace, Battle of Appomattox Courthouse. The war obviously ends finally, and this is like some of my 2 favorite telegrams about just letters being sent back. Do you want to quit? Yeah, we'll quit. But I want to know why you're quitting. All right, sounds good. It's very formal letters about surrender. Victory. Many people died. In fact, when we look at the numbers, holy crap, a lot of people died in the Civil War compared to all the other wars combined.
We never saw the video again.
No, we didn't. Yeah. Life will throw you curveballs, won't it? Yes, sir.
Oh yeah.
Is it in the yes, I did see that. In the second building, right? And it looked up at the, yeah, I saw that. That was pretty cool. That was pretty neat. Yes.
That's the real knife.
Well, I mean, would you imagine if it wasn't? You'd be like, well, why is it here then? Well, because, he was killed by a knife, but you could have told us and not put a fake knife. So just one of those things where, yeah, that's probably the real knife. It's like, this is Abraham Lincoln's fake body. Oh. Thank you for bringing that. Now I know that I assumed it was his real body. No, but again, Civil War, many people died.
Where did they find it?
What?
Where did they find it?
They found it in the home. It was the one who murdered William Seward. That wasn't a knife. That was William Seward's knife. They found it, I believe, in the same home of that one woman, the motel owner, the woman that. Well, her name's gonna come up in a second. Here's Lincoln getting old. Very sad. Getting older. Then he got shot in the head.
Do we have to learn by who?
No. I mean, you should know just because you're an American, but you should know who murdered Abraham Lincoln, but in general. No. Oh, it was Mary Surratt, that's her name. Mary Surratt. They found it at Mary Surratt's, not in the house, it was a boarding house. It was kind of like a hotel of sorts. They found it there and with the rest of the other people, and they hung them. It was good times. Lincoln obviously was paraded throughout 7 cities throughout the country. He's buried here. If you go to Springfield, Illinois, there's this monument of Lincoln's head, and it's considered lucky to rub his nose. And so that's why if you look at the picture, like his nose is already like white compared to everything else because people have rubbed it up. Also, fun fact, you see all of these, there's like 4 statues all the way around Lincoln's Memorial in Springfield, Illinois. Someone stole one of them. And people just didn't notice for the longest time. Yeah, it was just stolen one day, and then no one knew. Because no one realized that it was there. Because how often he's like, oh, it's 1, 3, 4. Okay, we're good, and then you just walk away. But when it was missing, no one double checked because you just don't notice those things, and so they don't even know how long it was gone for. I don't know if they ever found it, but I know that it was pretty shocking when someone was like, wait, aren't there supposed to be 4? And they're like, oh crap, there are supposed to be 4. And again, it came. No, but even then, it's like some of these have multiple characters on them. If you look at this one has 3 characters on the corner. And so some of the bronze was just stolen. And no one knew what happened to it because Lincoln's buried here. Mm-hmm. He's buried in Springfield, Illinois. His house is not too far. Well, I mean, no, it's deteriorated over time. But, I mean... No, I mean, on the ground. He's not above ground. He's underground, and they built a tomb over it. So. Last thing we're going to cover today is Reconstruction, folks. All right. So lastly, Reconstruction is the last segment you guys have to be aware of. Again, like we said before, the key things you guys should be aware of are what's happening to the minorities, immigrants, what's their struggles. And so the purpose of Reconstruction, of course, was to repair the damage to the South, restore the southern states to the Union, but more importantly, address the issue of freed slaves. 1, are we going to free them? And 2, what are we going to do with them? And I think that's one of those questions where we won the war, so you guys want to free the slaves? I mean, this is a question that we asked ourselves. Are we really going to do this? Because were there those that said, whatever, we won already, it's no big deal. But many people questioned whether or not we were actually going to free the slaves. And so we did, because, how are you not going to do that? You guys aware with presidential and Lincoln's Reconstruction, you should know that, 10% plan, make it easy, make it quick. So you should know presidential Reconstruction or Lincoln's 10% plan. Pretty much the goal was he wanted Reconstruction to end quickly. Was he fed up with the war already? It's like, I'm done with this. I fought the war. I'm tired. I mean, I got this terrible headache. And I just want to be done with all of it. So he wants the war to end quickly. He feels like he doesn't have very much time left to end this. And so one of the things that he does do, though, is that he decides that maybe we should free the slaves. So Lincoln does actually free all the slaves, but not with the Emancipation Proclamation. And that's the 13th Amendment. Good so far? Okay. Radical Republicans, though, they were not having any of that business of let's just make it easy and quick and simple. Did they want to punish the South? Yeah. Did they want to make them pay? Yeah, I mean, there's a vendetta, there's anger, there's frustration. All these people are dead. Brenda?
So you think if, Lincoln hadn't died, and we would have taken the 7% plan, you think it would be a much slower reconstruction and we would be where we are right now?
No, what would have happened is that, again, the Radical Republicans had an overwhelming majority or they eventually have an overwhelming majority in Congress. What would have happened is that the Republicans would not have sided with Lincoln again, and there would be this political dispute between Congress and the president. They would have vetoed, they would have overridden all his bills, he would have vetoed what they did, and there would be this political war, and Lincoln would probably go down as a very unpopular president. But because he died, he never got to make some of his unpopular decisions. Remember, folks, he almost did not free the slaves. He almost was willing to say, no, we're just going to keep the slaves the way they are. So with some pressure from Frederick Douglass, he decided to free the slaves, but it could have gone the other way. Oh, and by the way, it wasn't even Lincoln who freed the slaves. Because can Lincoln make amendments? No, it was the Congress who passed the amendment. Lincoln just said, yeah, I'll go with that. But he really has no power to do anything. So what it comes down to is, actually, how many slaves did Lincoln free? Zero. Ultimately, he freed no slaves. Because Congress is the one who passed the 13th Amendment, not Lincoln. It's one of those things, guys. Here you have the Radical Republicans. Don't worry about this so much. Wade Davis bill, you don't have to worry about this either, but this is the Radical Reconstruction and the policy. Instead of 10%, they wanted what? 50%. Let's make them apologize. Let's make them give that oath. This is what we want from them. Johnson Reconstruction, don't worry about it. Black codes, we pretty much are returning them back to a status of slavery. That's no bueno. Shopping and tenant farming is a must know. You should know the conditions of blacks after the war. You should know. We're forcing them to work on plantations. I'm sorry, they're not plantations. We're forcing them to work on farms. We're letting them rent the land. We're letting them work there. We're not going to pay you, though, till the end of the year. And if you don't pay us back in full, then you're going to have to stay and work for free. Well, yeah, because if you think about it, I mean, you're on my land. I mean, you're lucky to even be on my land in the first place. So at the end of the year, then everyone gets paid with crops and whatever else.
Technically, right now, the only good thing is that they're not getting
That happened too. But I mean, not by their owners, but like by other racist random people just walking around. So, I mean, again, imagine you're black and then you're upset at the fact that, you know, your country was completely destroyed by the whites, or by the blacks. And so you say you're at a bar and you got drunk with your other Confederate friends, and then you see a black man walking lonely, you beat the crap out of him. You are responsible for my losses. You are responsible for the death of my brother. You. And so, yeah, you have that going on. But you should be familiar with, again, what's happening in the South. Again, we talked about sharecropping, advantages, disadvantages. But again, sharecropping led to a cycle of debt, right? So we're all familiar with sharecropping and the problems that it had. Cycle of debt. There it is. No good. So again, we're looking at everything, and does it seem like everything seems to be right back to where we started? It does seem like it. Yeah, I would, despite what Julia Garcia believes, I do believe that this is similar to pre-Civil War conditions. And I think that many people were concerned about the fact that we weren't making very much progress. That the Civil War seems like we fought it for no reason because blacks were being treated like slaves. They were pretty much living on plantations as if they were slaves again, and we wondered who won. So radical Reconstruction begins, and we says, you know, enough. We have to change the South. We can't let it return. So one of the best things that we do is we create the Freedmen's Bureau. And the Freedmen's Bureau assisted these freed blacks in finding jobs, shelter, homes, food, what have you. And because the Republicans gave this to them, they would ultimately vote Republican, right? This sounds a lot like what? Yeah, party bosses. It's almost exactly like party bosses. But it's the same idea. We'll give you food, shelter, clothing, jobs, and, you know, if you want to vote for us, because we did this for you, by all means do it. Republicans did it for blacks. Party bosses and political machines did it for the immigrants. But this happened. And again, did this help them a lot? To some degree, yes, but again, ultimately, this is not going to progress because, yes, they have these jobs and these lands, but are there going to be other laws to keep them down? Yeah, so again, some progress made, not too much. We do start to educate. So again, the biggest success of the Freedmen's Bureau was education. Right? Education is by far the biggest success of the Freedmen's Bureau. There's a school I taught at. Civil Rights Act of 1866, don't worry about this so much, but you should know that we're slowly rolling out civil rights for Africans, or blacks. But the problem is we fear that it might be taken away, so eventually we pass the 14th Amendment. And when Congress passes the 14th Amendment promises that blacks or anyone born in America will be guaranteed what? Citizenship and civil rights. So citizenship comes with civil rights, guys. It's the dual. It's not just civil rights, it's citizenship, or it's not just citizenship, it's civil rights. Okay, you want citizenship for a reason. You're guaranteed rights to come with that. It's not, I'm an American citizen now, good for you. Do you get rights? Nope. They just gave me citizenship. It's duality, it comes with both. Don't worry about Johnson's swing around the circle, and then military week begins, and all that jazz. But you should know the 15th Amendment. And the 15th Amendment also happens. And we say, hey, we should give blacks what? The right to vote. So that occurs as well. And things are great. And blacks will have that right forever, and they'll exercise it with vigor, right? For some time, and then we start taking it away. And yes, ma'am.
Technically, without the 15th Amendment, you could be an American but not be able to vote.
That is correct. Without the 15th Amendment, you could have citizenship but not have the right to vote. Like who right now at that time period? Like women. Women are citizens. They don't have the right to vote.
So then shouldn't women have the right to vote with the 15th Amendment? Or
Nope.
did it like state like only men?
Men. You shall not be denied the right to vote based on race, creed, ethnicity, previous condition of servitude. It does not mention gender or sex. The 19th Amendment will mention that. But not yet. I mean, why are we going to give the women the right to vote? What have they done in American history recently? Oh, right. Antebellum reforms, social gospel movement, all those other things. Nurses, doctors, whatever. But again, we don't recognize women's contributions yet. Don't worry about the impeachment of Johnson, but you should remember that it did happen just because Johnson was not agreeing with military Reconstruction. They impeached him. Things were bad. Did he get removed?
No.
Was he impeached?
Yes.
But was he removed?
No.
Two different things, right? Good. Southern Reconstruction begins. You have carpetbaggers and scalawags. You should know that cartoon right there. That's going to be on your test. The one with the lady carrying the giant carpet bag.
Wait, what's the lady?
I'm sorry, it's a scalawag.
Is she like
She's the solid South holding up the carpetbaggers. So, like, the weight of carpetbaggers is holding down the South. It's a basic idea. So, again, oh yeah, the South hates the carpetbaggers and the scalawags.
But they're trying to knock them.
They're trying to help the blacks and the poor whites. Who hates them? All the former KKK, all the former Confederates. They hate them. And so what it comes down to is if you're a carpetbagger or a scalawag, I hate you. You're ruining my way of life. I liked being a racist. I like owning slaves. And now you're coming into my territory, giving blacks the right to vote. You're giving poor whites the right to vote. That's terrible. And so these cartoons, guys, quiet down. They depict scalawags and carpetbaggers to be bad. Scalawags were who?
the poor white Southerners?
Poor whites who were willing to work with blacks in Reconstruction, and carpetbaggers were who? Northerners who came to the South. And again, do Southerners like that? No, mind your own business, Northerners. And Southerners, how can you work with the blacks? You're going to give them the right to vote after what they did to us? So there's this me versus them mentality that the KKK tries to embolden in the South. You do have black Reconstruction, but that's not going to be on your finals. Don't worry about them. Again, it is important eventually to note the significance of black Reconstruction in the South. Ulysses S. Grant was super corrupt. Jim Crow laws, you should know those. Definitely. Segregation, that happened. Some pretty offensive pictures here, as you guys remember. So there's that. Yeah, most people don't like that one the most. The suggestion that dogs, Negroes, and Mexicans are all on the same playing field. It's horizontal racism. So, because they're all the same. You should definitely know Plessy v. Ferguson. Plessy v. Ferguson ruled that segregation was okay provided that it was equal. So separate but equal. So you should know that. Rise. Huh? Oh yeah, definitely. The ones we just talked about. Yeah, we should know those. You can't hear either? So, when I'm talking, it's not like, my eyes don't work. Oh, I'm sorry, you can't hear me. So the rise of the KKK is also a significant problem. Because again, they're wanting to retake the South. I mean, they're not happy with black Reconstruction. They don't like the fact that blacks are voting. And again, the KKK rise up. I mean, if you remember, the KKK were supposed to represent the dead souls that were lost during the Civil War. And so they're going to come back and try to take away as many rights as possible. And they do a pretty good job. You can read this later if you go online, just again about what happened. You can just press pause and it'll work out for you guys.
Oh, that's right.
Anyway, so the KKK do show up. They terrorize, and it is terrifying. I mean, you never know when you'll be attacked. You never know when you'll be the target. And when it happens once, if it happens once in your community where they make it very clear, I'm going to attack you because you tried to vote. I'm going to attack you. I'm going to hang you from a tree. It doesn't even have to happen to you. If it happens to someone on your street, they attack you, they beat you, and they hang you from a tree to die. And they make it very clear, we did this to him because he tried to vote. Are you going to try to vote? No. So the mere use of fear and intimidation wasn't effective. Because again, voting is important, but let's be honest, folks, voting or your life. And a lot of people are going to say, I like the principle, but I don't think I'm willing to die for it, which is sad because many people are. But in this case, they just weren't, or at least they were too fearful. Now, did some people still risk it? Most definitely. But eventually, when the other Jim Crow laws show up, literacy test, poll taxes, grandfather clause, it does make it significantly more difficult. We do try to stop the KKK with the Force Act, so you should be familiar with the Force Act. Remember, not to be confused with the Force Bill. Force Bill was Andrew Jackson. I'm going to collect terrorists with military if I want. Force Acts, or the Enforcement Acts, this is what? Yeah. Sending the military to stop the KKK. Okay. It was a long... That's a 6 o'clock bell thingy. I don't know why it takes so long. But the Force Acts were the North sending in military to seek out the KKK, protect blacks. I mean, that's really what the purpose was. But the South obviously was not having any of that. There was a counter-revolution. They were willing to kill them. And again, if you look at the cartoon here, it's called In Self-Defense. The Southern Shiv, or the chivalrous gentleman, says, if I hadn't killed you, you would have grown up to rule me. So the fear is that if I don't kill you, then eventually you'll be in charge. You will govern me. So it is a white man killing a black child. The fear being, if I don't do it now, then I will be the one. And again, the fear is whether or not, they're going to do the same thing to them, right? Once blacks are in charge, are they going to do the same that we did to them? So there is a sense of cycle of violence that is just inherent in human society. We did it to you, you do it to me. I mean, same is true in the Middle East today. When Palestinians and Israelis attack each other, well, they killed my family, so when I grow up, I'm going to do the same thing to them, and then the cycle is going to continue. So at some point, we need to learn how to stop that cycle of violence, but it is occurring here back in the 1860s. It occurs today in the 2000s. It's just one of those things. Also, Battlestar Galactica. Cycle of violence. Watch it. It'll blow your minds, guys. Great show. Is the military protecting the black from the KKK, from the South, from the racists, all that stuff? I don't know why this slide doesn't work. But again, lynching became a big, serious issue, though. Again, this is where they would go around and hang the blacks for trying to vote or just being black in general. So, if you look, if it lynchings of whites and blacks, if you look at the actual data here, they would lynch white people too, just to make that clear. They would lynch white people if they were what? Scalawags, carpetbaggers. Anyone who assisted blacks would also be hung because they said, who do you think you are? I mean, really, you think you're going to come down into my country and help them? Them? You're just as black as they are. We'll kill you too. So that did occur. And guys, this occurred all the way up to the 1960s and 1970s. In fact, it happens rarely today, but it does happen from time to time. But again, this happened up until the 1960s, actively in the South. The movie Mississippi Burning is about the same issue, about lynching in the 1960s. I mean, 1960s, guys. I mean, your parents and my parents were alive at that time. I don't know about your parents, but my parents were alive at that time. And so it's one of those issues where it's a pretty tenuous situation. Again, disenfranchisement, blacks voting eventually, it's good times there. Again, not very much. This is the last thing you guys should be aware of. There you go.
Wait, the Hayes Tilden Compromise goes into this, right?
Yep, that is correct. The Hayes-Tilden Compromise is folded in to this lecture. The Hayes-Tilden Compromise of 1877, as you guys might recall, was the end of Reconstruction, because the agreement was we will let Hayes, the Republican, be president if you do what? You stop Reconstruction. And how are we going to stop Reconstruction? By what? Removing federal troops or the military from the South. That's the end of Reconstruction. Yeah, the Hayes-Tilden Compromise of 1877. Again, we will end Reconstruction if you remove military troops from the South. Cool? There's that guy. And the South was redeemed, which means what? What does that mean, though? But what does that mean, though? Redemption, redeemed. Right, but what does the word redeemed mean? It was redeemed by who? Yeah, the poor, racist whites took the South back. The KKK took the South back. Cool. A lot of questions, but that's it. So if you guys are in periods 1 and 3, that's everything. If you guys are in 2 and 6, we'll finish Unit 6 tomorrow. So if you guys were in Unit 1 and 3, we did this slightly out of chronological order. If you guys have me tomorrow, then we'll do it in chronological order. Both of these lectures will be posted online tonight, so if you guys need that, let me know. Have a wonderful day, folks. Thank you guys for coming. Enjoy your evening.